So if you would appreciate you giving a listen this morning, if you would, on the idea of the Apostle Paul is actually, in other words, coming into a kind of a contradiction, a contrast, if you will, back and forth of where his ministry seemingly, in other words, has ended up at. And notice, if you will, he makes the statement here. He said, by honor and dishonor, by an evil report and a good report, as deceivers and yet true. And this is how, in other words, his ministry began to start to go. It got to the point that when you get right down to it, that in other words, that when he first started his ministry, man, everybody thought he was wonderful. Everybody thought he was great. Everybody thought, in other words, oh man, this guy's wonderful. I mean, in other words, he's a fine church builder, soul winner, church door knocker, and all that good stuff, and what have you. And everybody thought it was wonderful. But then all of a sudden, there seemed like, in other words, there was a contrast going back and forth to the idea of, in other words, by honor and dishonor. He was receiving honor from some and dishonor from others. And there's a reason for that, and what have you. He said, by evil report and a good report. He said, as deceivers and yet true. He said whenever, in other words, he started ministering and such and what have you on that line, he said, there's where it is immediately. He would find himself the idea of getting, in other words, a good report about his work. Then all of a sudden, somebody would hand in an evil report about the idea that he's a deceiver and what have you on that line. So then all of a sudden, he says, and as unknown and yet well known. He got to the point where, in other words, it is that he was well known as a church builder, an apostle, the super apostle, if you will, no getting around it. Then all of a sudden, slowly but surely, there's where it is he became, in other words, unknown. Matter of fact, they were pushing him back, in other words, in the ministries and stuff like that, to the point where it is other folks came along, these Judaizers and these guys that were actually coming in, stealing from, in other words, the churches and what have you along that line. And there's where it is he found himself, if you will, having to justify himself to his own ministry. Find it interesting, I really do, that, in other words, that you would... excuse me, still trying to get over a cold here. I find it interesting that, in other words, you've got to justify yourself to your own ministry. Well, what happens is sometimes we get to the point where, in other words, we don't appreciate, in other words, where it is we came from. We don't appreciate, in other words, those it is that has helped us along. You know, there's a lot of people that, in other words, that helped me in my ministry that I didn't agree with by no stretch of the imagination. I don't know about you, but there's where it is immediately. We've got to be careful about, in other words, how it is, in other words, we treat one another. And this is where the Apostle Paul is setting this up, in other words, to this church at Corinth, that this is exactly, in other words, what it is that he's found himself as known and yet well known. And we already did the thing about the idea that he was maybe, in other words, not well known, in other words, around, I can see how this is going to go. Around the world as far as that goes, so get ready. Around the world, what happened? Everybody know he was known in hell, wasn't he? He said that evil spirit says, Jesus I know and Paul I know, but who are you? And so we've already went over that, and I just thought that would be something that was to bring out once again. He says, as dying, and behold, he said, we live. Now, there's, I think, where it is we left off last time. And I want to show you a verse, that, if you will, that I think is so telling about the Apostle Paul. He said, I am crucified, he said, but though For I, though through the law am dead to the law, that I might live unto God. And this is where it is he finds himself. I am crucified with Christ, nevertheless I live. Yet not I, but Christ liveth in me. In the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by the faith of the Son of God, who says, who loved me and gave himself for me. Now watch this. He said, I'm crucified with Christ. Now, what is he saying there? He's saying the idea, he said, the old man, talk about the Apostle Paul, he said, is dead. And there's where it is, he said, I'm crucified with Christ, nevertheless, he said, yet, nevertheless I live. Yet not I, but Christ liveth in me. In the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by the faith of the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. What he's saying is even though I'm alive, he said, you nail this thing down, the old Paul, or the old Saul, if you will, is dead, and all I'm doing now is living, he said, my life for the Lord. How many knows that's exactly the way it is we have to live as Christians? If you know that, say amen. Matter of fact, I think sometimes the most important thing it is, in other words, we can realize that the old man needs to die. He needs to stay dead. Matter of fact, the Apostle Paul said, I die daily. he said. And matter of fact, my Bible makes a statement that we ought to take up our cross. You know that?
Yeah.
Did you know that in the book of Luke, whenever it makes mention of that particular, in other words, parallel passage, it says, in other words, he makes a statement. He said, take up your cross daily. He adds the word daily in there in the idea. And that's exactly what it is we need to do. If we're not careful, in other words, one of these days, the old Danny's going to wake up out of that bed one of these days and want to go ahead and start doing things the way he wants to. And how many knows that can be a big mess? If you know that, say amen. So, and that's, I think it's important for us to see that. And he says, as known and yet well known, he says, and dying and we live, and he says, as chastened and not, what did he say? Killed. Now, I find it interesting here, the idea that he's making the statement that he's being chastened. Well, I don't think in other words, that statement, in other words, is true in the sense of the idea that he's actually being chastened, necessarily, possibility. I think, in other words, to this degree, can I give it to you right quick? You realize the Apostle Paul had a thing about his own self that he pretty well wanted to do things, in other words, all by himself. He really, when you get right down to it, did not want, in other words, to be able to sometimes, in other words, partner up with people. And there's where it is a bit, this is where it is, I personally believe it is, the chastening of the Lord begin to start to happen in his life. This is whenever his eye, I think his eye and his vision and what have you, begin to get worse and worse and worse. The reason is, he wasn't able to do what it is he was supposed to do with a limited vision. And the reason why I say that is, this is why, in other words, he constantly had to have somebody along with him to help him. Matter of fact, in other words, he had, in other words, somebody sometimes dictating, in other words, his own letters. Sometimes he made the statement, I have written this letter, though, with mine own hand. So I find that interesting, him bringing that out. Then the idea that the Lord, in other words, wanted him to be able to, in other words, to have a writing ministry. And there's where it is, he was just doing it here, there, and yonder. And then all of a sudden it was almost like that wasn't what it is that he wanted to kind of focus on. So immediately, as far as I'm concerned, what the Lord did was threw him in jail. And you say, well, what is that? That's a chastening, if you will. I believe seriously the idea about his vision and what has you was simply nothing but a chastening, if you will. To be able to sit there and say, no, partner. No. You're not going to do this. See, God don't have Lone Rangers. He's always wanted, that's why in the words when he sent out the 70, how'd he send them out? 2 by 2. How many here knows that's the smart thing to do? It really is. We may not like it, but that's exactly God does not want, in other words, the idea about these, the heroes, if you're not careful, my friend, end up zeros, if you're not careful. Because that's not the way God works. He never has, never will. Somebody ought to say amen. And then whenever God's got a point for a point, you know, it may not be the idea that the Apostle Paul thought, in other words, well, me writing letters to these churches, I mean, I'd rather go there. Hey, appreciate that. Appreciate, in other words, you'd rather go there. Appreciate that. But you know what the problem with that is? We wouldn't have 14 books of the New Testament today if he just kept going there and kept telling them, talking to them, come on, teaching them. Come on, somebody else say amen. So this chastening and what have you, please don't misunderstand me as far as that goes. I believe that there was some chastening going on in the life of the Apostle Paul. Come on. And the reason is in other words, it's the idea to get us to do what it is we're supposed to do. Now, how many knows, in other words, that's an interesting thought, isn't it? He said, in other words, as chastened, and he says, and not killed. I believe seriously sometimes when something bad happens to good people, immediately people say, well, bad things happening to good people means, in other words, they ain't good people. Come on. So now this chastening takes another thought. The contrast that I just got to talking about. Sometimes when somebody goes through a chastening and what have you, they get whooped, they get beat, they get shipwrecked, they have some problems, some trials, tribulations, some troubles and what have you. And immediately there's where it is, oh well, he's being chastened by the Lord. Come on. Then the idea all of a sudden it says, yet he says, and not killed. This guy was beaten, in other words, something stoned, if you will, at Lystra. You realize, in other words, they thought literally he was dead. In other words, no getting around it. Yet, in other words, he said, not killed. He shipwrecked 3 different times. How many knows that could be a dangerous situation? If you know that, say amen. Yet not killed. Come on. See, sometimes when we already went through all this other stuff, so I'm not going to go back through it again. I'm just showing how the Apostle Paul is showing this contrast, this contradiction. Contrast and contradiction, if you will, back and forth of the idea, honor on one hand, dishonor on another. Evil report on one hand, good report on another. As deceivers, yet true. Unknown, yet well known. As dying, and behold, we live. As chastened and not killed. Can you see how this thing goes? Then watch this. As sorrowful. You'd think, in other words, this guy that's going through all this, well, of course, in other words, he's going to end up being sorrowful as far as that goes. My goodness gracious, why wouldn't you be? He says, as sorrowful, yet always, what did he say? Always what?
Rejoicing.
Always rejoicing. Okay, I can see how this is going to be, folks. You ready? Just in case? Okay. He said, I think I can do this one. Okay. Oh, what is that? Okay. It sure don't taste like tomato juice. Anyway, so immediately there's where it is. He says, as sorrowful, yet always rejoicing. You ever wonder why it is somebody who is a good, great Christian can go through some hard times? Now, Brother Curtis, you do realize, my goodness, every time I feel sorry for myself, I can call him up and talk to him about 10 minutes, and immediately, when I get off there, I got no problems at all. I guarantee you. This cat has been sued so many times, almost to the point of the idea that if one of those lawsuits would have ever went through, his church is only set up for $1 million. That's what ours is set up for, the idea. But you know, anything over $1 million, you do realize it's going to come out of your pocket. It's going to come out of your buildings or whatever else. In other words, that you can do after that. There's no getting around that. And this last lawsuit and what have you, I guarantee you, they were thinking about the cha-ching, no getting around that. The $1 million goes, in other words, like that. But let's say it had been $2 million. You realize they'd have had to close the doors. Simply because the idea that the properties were going to end up having to be sold to be able to pay this whole thing off. So, but you know what? Constantly, yet though the sorrows that this man has faced, in other words, with the health issues with his family, and I mean in every direction imaginable, not only his kids, but also, in other words, now his grandkids. The thing with Michaela, my goodness gracious alive, it's just, in other words, just one thing after another, right? Yet though I can be with that man, in other words, a short amount of time. Listen to me very carefully. I can be with him for a short amount of time, and I guarantee you if the conversation ever lulls when we're either driving or around one another, something like that, you know the first thing he does?
Sings. Starts singing. Yeah.
How'd you guys know that?
Because that's what he does.
He does it here.
He does.
Sit right there and sing himself.
Man.
Yeah.
Man, it's almost like you guys are listening, huh? Usually I have to tell you guys everything. But that's why he just breaks off into a song.
That's good.
And here it is, the idea of perfect example, as sorrowful, yet always rejoicing. As a matter of fact, you've heard me make the statement that, you know, over the years of ministry and what have you like that, we've had a little rough time here, there, and yonder for different reasons. I'm not going to go through all those things. I just want you to feel sorry for me. Immediately, there's where it is. I sit there, you always wonder, in other words, how's your wife taking this situation? And you've heard me make the statement that I can be, in other words, in the den or something like that, and what have you. She'll be in the kitchen, what have you, and I can hear her break out in the middle of a song. Now, that's not rare. Don't misunderstand me necessarily. But you know what I always relate it to? Anytime I hear her break out into a song, I immediately think to myself, what are we going through right now? And I can think to myself several different times over the years, I can hear her break into a song and what have you, and know clearly that things aren't going well. In other words, with this situation, that situation, this situation, that. But that's the idea. As sorrowful, yet, he said, yet always, what does he say? Rejoicing. Now, let me show you a little thing right quick. I've been Been wanting to do this one right here. Notice, if you will, he talks about he says, rejoice in the Lord always, and again I say, rejoice. Now that's in the book of Philippians. Guess where he's at? He's writing this. He's in jail. He's in jail when he's writing this. Rejoice in the Lord always, and again I say, well, I find that interesting. I most assuredly do. And as you start taking a look at this whole situation, that's exactly, my friend, of what it is, in other words, we see. Notice he says, and I just don't want to read, I just want to just keep reading, but notice, if you will, those things which you have both learned and received and heard and seen in me, do. He said, and the God of peace shall be with you. But I rejoiced in the Lord greatly that now at the last your care of me hath flourished again, wherein ye are also careful, but ye lacked opportunity. The word rejoice and joy, you ought to count it sometimes. Read the book of Philippians. It's 4 chapters. So what you ought to do, in other words, this next week, 4 chapters, read through it and underline, if you will, the word, if you will, joy or rejoicing or something along that line. And what you're going to end up seeing is the idea, this is one of the main, in other words, themes through and throughout, in other words, this whole passage of Scripture. So I find this interesting. As sorrowful, he said, he made the statement. He said, as sorrowful. He said, yet always rejoicing. Now, let me go a little bit further. Now, watch this. Now, all of a sudden, he's doing something very interesting. In these contrasts and in these contradictions that he's bringing out, if you will, to his own ministry, his own church here at Corinth, this is 2 Corinthians, all of a sudden he does a little bit of a change right here. And I find it interesting, I really do. Because he's now going to make a plea, if you will, in the middle of these contrasts and contradictions. He says, as sorrowful, yet always rejoicing, as poor, yet making many, he said, rich. Can I talk to y'all just for a minute? Do you realize, in other words, over the ministry that we've had here, in other words, at Wasco, and I think it happens other places, please don't misunderstand me. I'm not just focusing it right here, so don't think that that's the way it is. But it says, in other words, as poor, yet making many rich. How many times have you heard me preach that, in other words, the idea that some of you sitting here right now have, in other words, have better jobs than you've ever had before. You got better cars than you've ever had before. You've got better houses than you've ever had before. You've got more money than you've ever had before. Isn't that good? Now, I don't know about you, but I can look around this room right now. There's some people in this room, I guarantee you, they were having financial problems. In other words, when you came to this church, you wasn't able, in other words, to be able to pay your bills. You were trying to figure out how this thing was ever going to work. You're trying to figure out how you were ever going to tithe, how you were ever going to give, or anything else along that line. And all of a sudden, in other words, you begin to start to do the things it is that I preached and taught and biblically, in other words, showed and what have you. The next thing you know is, come on. And watch this. Some of you got the same job you had. Got the same job you had, but all of a sudden the next thing you know is, it's like a blessing that the Lord has poured out on you. Just simply because, that's the guy, he said, as poor, yet making many rich. Do you realize the people that have been in this church and that have actually, my friend, in other words, even gone to other places, if you will, you can go to them right now, and they're in 2-story houses. They've got new cars. Their kids have got new cars. They got better. Come on, somebody ought to say amen. Now, I don't know about you, but you do realize that anybody that was ever able to bring that along in your life, or any ministry, you ought to be thankful for it. Wouldn't you think so? Amen. Come on. And see, this is what it is. I don't think, and this is the problem with prosperity. Can you imagine there being a problem with prosperity? There's a problem with prosperity when it goes to your head. If it goes in your heart, that's fine. But when it goes to your head, there's where it is you're going to be in a world of hurt somewhere along the line. There ain't no getting around that. So when the Apostle Paul is doing this, here's what he's doing. He's saying, Corinthians, don't you remember how it was when I first got here? He said, in other words, here it is. We were poor, we came here, and he said we turned around and ended up making, if you will, many, what did he say? Rich. Isn't that what it says? Now, we're talking, that's of course relative to some degree, I would imagine, as far as that goes. We're not talking about the idea of having, an absorbent amount of money. It's the idea, in other words, you got more money than, in other words, got more money, not more money you know what to do with, but you got more money, in other words, to be able to do a lot of things, in other words, you weren't able to do before. Somebody ought to say amen. And that's the idea. Now the Apostle Paul is kind of showing some things here, if you will. He says the idea, he said, as poor, yet making many rich, and as having nothing, and yet possessing
all things.
Are y'all listening to me today? See, I'm fixing to show you something probably ain't nobody ever shown you before in your life. Y'all ready for this? And you're going to sit there and you're going to think to yourself, I never thought about that. I never thought about that. You guys ready for this now? And that's true. I can look around this room right now, and I don't know of anybody in this room right now that's living for the Lord like you're supposed to that ain't better off, in other words, because you have been living right. Okay? And that's the idea. I don't know about you, but that's something that I guarantee you is something that's rich. It's good.
Yeah.
No getting around that. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. I got caught up with my own teaching. I'm going to show you something here. You got it ready for this now? If you want to say amen. It says, therefore, let no man glory in men. This is one of the biggest problems with Christians today. They start glorying in men and not with the Master.
What does that mean? Glory in men?
The idea that, in other words, you're taking people, individuals, and you're actually raising them up, if you will, in prominence or anything else, in other words, along that line. And the Lord, in other words, is losing, in other words, his in there. I see, in other words, I see young people doing that, in other words, when they find themselves a little sweetheart. There's no getting around that. They get sweet on somebody, next thing you know, they can't serve the Lord. How many here know, you know who just took a back seat? The Lord did. And by the way, he ain't going to get in the back seat.
That's right.
When he gets out, he ain't going to get in the back seat, he's going to get out. And ain't coming back in.
That's right.
Come on, somebody. No, he's not a co-pilot either. You know what a co-pilot is? If somebody takes over when you can't handle it. Best thing to do is God is my co-pilot. He used to have a bumper sticker that said that. God needs to be your pilot.
That's right.
Period. Okay. The idea, therefore let no man glory in men. You do realize that some people right now are more worried about pleasing men, than they are pleasing God. The Pharisees were constantly like that in the book of John chapter 12. Because they're worried about being put out of the synagogue, they, in other words, desire the praise of men more than the praise of God, to please God. Is anybody getting this thing? I'm going to show you a guy, in other words, in the 11 o'clock service, if I think I'm going to be able to do this or not, I'm not sure, about the Uzziah. Uzziah, my friend, was a fantastic individual. But he got his eyes off of the Lord, and actually, in other words, Isaiah got his eyes off of the Lord and got it on Uzziah, and the reason is because Uzziah became an amazing, in other words, individual. Amazing. Brought about, in other words, one of the greatest, in other words, movements, if you will, in Israel's history, one of the good kings. And while he did that which was right in the sight of the Lord, that's all fine and dandy. But it got to the point, in other words, that actually, in other words, knocked Isaiah off, in other words, if you will, of where he ought to be looking to. Don't look to man.
That's right.
Don't look. I don't know about you, but you folks have got to quit giving too much power to people. You got to quit giving power to people. There's people, my friend, on a regular basis. If somebody's sad or mad or bad to you, that's pretty good. Somebody will write that down. I'll preach that somewhere along the line. And what have you, then you can't function. You just can't function. I mean, in other words, it's just over with. I don't want to work. I don't want to eat. I don't want to go to church. I don't want to do this. I don't want to do that. You give them too much power to people right there. Way too much power to people. And this is where it is. And some people, my friend, cannot never serve God if everybody around them. And this is where this is where compromise comes in at. It's the idea about compromising. If my family and I are going to treat me right, I'm going to do right as long as I'm a fundamentalist and I hold a hard line and stuff along that line, well, I'm just not going to be that because I don't want to make them mad. I don't want to lose their whatever. Come on. And that's on a regular. That's too much power. Give too much power to people. Period. Put a dot at the end of it. And you have to. Okay, I'm sorry. Therefore, let no man glory in men. And some people do. One of the biggest problems, in other words, with people also is we get our eyes on television stars, on TV stars, movie stars, people in athletics and stuff along that line. Just immediately, it just goes to their head, and they're glorying in men. And he goes on, he said, for all things are yours. Now watch this. It says, whether Paul or Apollos or Cephas or the world or life or death, nor things present nor things to come, what does it say? All are yours. I heard this one big bad redneck boy that made the statement on a movie one time in the context of a Christian. This big old boy sat there and looked at this Christian. He said, you meek are supposed to inherit the earth. And the Christian was going, yeah. He goes, well, he said, the reason why you're going to inherit it, we're going to give it to you. Well, I find that interesting. I really do. I don't know about him, but I'd have had to have told him, I'd say, well, excuse me, sir, it's already mine. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. It's already mine. The meek have already inherited the earth. It's already ours. This is the dumbest thing I think. See, I don't think we understand our authority either. We've got the authority to bind and loose. And here we are piddling around with so much ignorant junk and what have you on that line, and this is the idea, and this is what the Apostle Paul, you realize, in other words, when you got saved and you started living for God and you came into this church, watch this now, notice if you will, it got to the point, in other words, that there you were poor to some degree, some of you weren't. He said, in other words, yet making many, what does it say, rich. And watch the stair step. Not only, in other words, did we take you out of your poorness, gave you a position and prosperity, turned right around, my friend, and then sit there and put you in a position so everything is yours. Everything is yours. Every resource that there is on the face of this earth, if God wants to give it to you, He can give it to you. Come on, somebody ought to say amen right about there. I find this so interesting. I mean, I most assuredly do. And that's why he made the statement. He says, and having nothing, he says, and yet possessing, what does he say? All things. He said, in other words, I get myself in the middle of a storm or what have you, been shipwrecked 3 times. He said, ain't no big deal. He said, the person that brought the storm to begin with and one that started the storm can stop the storm. Because everything's, in other words, ours. He said, in other words, there's where it is. He said, I may be chastened. He said, but I will not be killed until God says, in other words, okay, well, Paul, it's time for you to be killed. And that's when we got also, can I talk to you about that for a minute? Amen. You do realize, as far as I'm concerned, I personally believe it is, in other words, this is the way God, in other words, works, does, and deals, in other words, with Christians. He said, for I'm ready to be offered. My time is at hand. I'm ready to be offered. He already knew this, didn't he? Yes. He's agreeing to it. He's saying, Lord, okay, here we go. I don't think, in other words, also whenever somebody gets killed, in other words, for the faith's sake, for the Lord's sake and what have you, I don't think it's a surprise. Whenever Stephen, my friend, was being stoned to death, You realize, do you see the calmness of him, in other words, actually, in other words, conversing with the Lord as he is being stoned? Is anybody getting this thing? I just don't think, in other words, all of a sudden you're just thrown into a lion's den situation. Well, Daniel knew that's where he was going, right? It's okay with me. That's where we're going. Oh yeah, by the way, 3 Hebrew children, you fix to go into the fire if you don't bow. Or if you don't bend a little bit. Come on. Come on. Is anybody getting this thing? When I talked about the idea about all those Christians, in other words, being martyred, in other words, in 2006, not 2006, when was it? 2016. That's what it was, 2016. What was it? 1 every 6 minutes or whatever it was? As far as I'm concerned, I don't think, in other words, it was an accident. I don't think, in other words, it is. In other words, they were just swept up as far as that goes. I think, seriously, my friend, this is where it is. This is the way that God deals with people. Not accidental. This is not the way God works. It's not the way God does. This is not the way God deals. Interesting thought. Okay. Well, because you do realize it's chastened yet not killed, sorrowful, rejoicing, poor, rich, having nothing, and then all of a sudden doing what? Possessing all things. Do you realize there's not a resource on the face of this earth, my friend, that if God wants to, can bring it in other words, into your situation. If that's exactly what it is, in other words, you need. I can say want it necessarily, if that's what it is, in other words, you need. Is anybody getting this thing? Oh, by the way, isn't it interesting, in other words, where we all came from? Come on. Honestly. And pick some of you folks up, in other words, like I said, didn't have food to eat at one time. Didn't know when you were going to be able to pay your next bills. Then all of a sudden, but getting involved, in other words, in real, true ministry as a child of Almighty God, and we're not limiting it to this church. Please don't misunderstand me. But do you realize, now look what's been handed to you. Now you say, well, what is your point about this whole thing? Well, I think the point of it is this. The point of it is all of a sudden, then what is the problem then? Why is there this disconnect between, in other words, the Apostle Paul and his ministry, and his people and what have you, and this stinking church at Corinth? When all of a sudden they have been brought, in other words, from this poverty, this poor, to prosperity. Come on. This is what he's doing here. Why is all this thing? Well, here's the reason. And this is what he's getting to. Watch this. He said, in other words, in verse number 11, he says, "O ye Corinthians, our mouth is open unto you, and our heart is enlarged." And he didn't mean, in other words, that he was having heart problems. It meant, in other words, he said, "And our heart, in other words, is opened unto you." He said, "Our mouth is opened unto you." He said, we're trying to reason with you. He said, we're trying to figure out, in other words, what is the problem here? What's the deal? I mean, what's going on here? Why in the world, in other words, are we having this riff? Why are we having this beef? Why are we having this tete-a-tete, this set to and what have you? What is the deal here? He said, it's like the idea, can't you realize where you was at and where you're at now? Okay? He said, in other words, "O ye Corinthians, our mouth is open to you." He said, I'm trying to talk to you. He said, "And our heart is enlarged." It's opened up simply for the idea of what? For you to come in. For us to embrace, in other words, you. Okay? Now, you say, well, what are you trying to get at here? Well, let me show you one of the things it is that the Apostle Paul found himself at. First of all, 2 Corinthians chapter 12 and verse number 15, he made this statement, and I find it interesting. He says, "Behold, the third time I'm ready to come to you, and will not be burdensome to you, for I seek not yours, but you." He said, "For the children ought not to lay up for the parents, but the parents for the children." He's saying, in other words, we've tried to lay everything up it is that's needful for you. He says, and I will very gladly spend, and what does he say? And be spent for you. He said, though the more abundantly I love you. Does this sound like ungrateful children? Does this sound like somebody without natural affection? Unthankful? Unholy? It almost sounds like a verse, doesn't it? Yes.
And if that's supposed to be happening at the end of the last days, children being like that, why is that like that in the beginning also?
There. It's going to be spotted and dotted here, there, and yonder. Matter of fact, I'm fixing to show you one thing, and I do find it interesting. That's talking about the last days. If you'll put everything together in that list of, I think it's 19 things, I think something like that, 19 things, you realize that's a whole bunch. And it wouldn't be the idea that there weren't little spots and dots of it here, there, and yonder, all the way throughout church history. As far as that goes, I think you're going to find it always. Somebody made the statement, the 7 churches in the book of Revelations, 7 churches in the book of Revelations, people try to dispensate that thing to the point of saying the church at Ephesus was the first century church all the way up to whatever. And then the second church was, in other words, they're trying to make it another group of years. Well, I don't personally believe that. I really don't. I personally believe, in other words, every one of those churches, all 7 churches, you're going to be able to find them, in other words, here, there, and yonder, all over the place. You're going to be able to find them. There's just no getting around that. So the idea that you've got it spotted and dotted here, there, and yonder, you're going to have that. Because that wasn't true for every church. The Philippian church would certainly be a church that, in other words, that pretty well was clicking along pretty fair along that line. So now we're fixing to show you how this. But listen to me very carefully, though. I think he said, "And I will very gladly spend and be spent." In other words, for you, though the more abundantly I love you, the less he says I be loved. Now, why is this? Why is this? There's a thing about contentment that we've got to grab a hold of. We have got to quit always looking around, in other words, for greener grass. Yeah. Most of the time, if the grass looks greener on the other side, it's an optical illusion. Yeah. Usually when you get over there, you find out it's just as green as it was over there. Matter of fact, maybe a little worse off. And plus, any place that's got greener grass, it's got a higher water bill. Always remember that if you're in California. What? Okay? But this contentment, well, that's what we got to be careful of. Now, I'm all for the idea of, in other words, trying to fix things here, there, and like that. But when we get to the point where it is, in other words, we start getting an attitude because things aren't exactly how they could be. This is where, in other words, this problem comes in at. And then I got to go back to the idea. You realize the biggest problem that the Corinthians faced, I'm fixing to answer, in other words, your question is this right there. The Apostle Paul, whenever it is that he wrote and what have you, whenever he preached and whenever he taught, I guarantee you it wasn't a pleasant thing, folks. Somebody's not reading their Bible. Honestly, somebody's not reading their Bible. I find it interesting that, in other words, that people, in other words, have a problem with the idea about how people that preach hard and what have you on that line, trying to figure out the idea that, I just can't figure out why in the world, in other words, they preach so hard and what have you like that, and they seem like they're mean and stuff and all that. Have you ever read the Bible? Are you kidding me? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you this. We're going to have to get a little sign. I think here's what it's going to be. See, here it is again. How about that? All that means is see, and by the way, we're in chapter 6 right here. You realize, in other words, what it is we're going to be dealing with here? It's the same thing. In other words, it's going to be this over and over and over again. Whatever the Apostle Paul wrote is exactly what it is, in other words, he preached. This is exactly what it is that he taught, everything else on that line. So, I'm really having a problem. And here's and the false apostles that he talks about in chapter number, what chapter am I in? I'm in 12. Let's do it this way. There's 12. Let me just do it this way. He makes a statement. He said, I fear lest by any means, for he that cometh, in other words, preacheth another Jesus, which have not preached, another spirit, another gospel. He said, you're going to go right along with it. You know what the biggest problem is with others, with Christians? Some mealy-mouthed, mush-mouthed minister comes up with a message that's about as meaningless and mindless as you can imagine, as far as that goes. And in other words, the next thing you know, everybody, oh, that's wonderful and great. I wish Brother Danny would die. And we can get him as a pastor. I just felt so good whenever I walked down there. I just, oh, hey, it's just wonderful. I just wonder if we can afford Brother Curtis. I can tell you right now, you can't. I know what our budget is, and I know what he gets paid. You can't. Okay, this is the idea. This is when people, in other words, get to this point. They start turning their attention, in other words, away from, and that's exactly, in other words, what happens. There's just simply just no getting around it. These people bring this cheap, easy believism and what have you in there. I don't. That's why they don't quote many verses. Yeah, there's just not a whole lot of verses as far as that goes. So, and I think that's one of the problems. And this is the idea of what it is we're dealing with here. Let's pray. Father, we pray just now that you just touch the lives of those, Father, that have come today. And Lord, we love you today. Thank you, praise you. Ask all in the precious name of Jesus for a sacred prayer today. And all the God's people said, Amen. Amen. You are dismissed.